You done with your Oreo?
Yeah, done with my Oreo.
Okay, good. Do we really know what happened? The brother did.
The brother, that's what I thought too.
I mean, that seems like kind of obvious. Hey, do you want to talk about death?
Yeah. I mean,
Murdery thingy.
That's all I can say.
Usually I'm the one saying ready a bunch of times.
What is this?
Murdery thingy.
You said myrrh.
I was gonna say murdery first, and then I
This is
just said it.
Mystery Murdery Thingy. Welcome.
This is Mystery Murdery Thingy.
Welcome to Wednesday. I'm Chloe.
I'm Mario.
And we're here to talk some late night mystery.
Yes. Yes, we are doing this 1 hour before Wednesday.
We are busy bees.
Because we are
busy bees.
busy bees.
Do you want to go first or second? I think you should go first.
I'll go
I'm
first.
Like really excited. I was asking you all these questions, and you were like, "Just wait."
Yeah. I was telling you like a little bit about it. So, okay, so this week I'm talking about Black Cube. Black Cube.
All right,
Just
all right.
like the name, it's just like conjures up mystery, right? It's just like, what is it? Is it a black box with something in it? Is it like a bomb? Is it a black hole? Like,
Spoiler alert: it is not.
it's not any of that shit. It is a private intelligence service, aka a provider of business intelligence or litigation support services, as they euphemistically say.
Mario's
So,
doing the air quotes.
I'm doing air quotes, y'all. So, yeah, litigation support services. So this is, if you're like a real, rich person, if you're a business, if you're a country, you might, need some of these services, and you might call a company like Black Cube. And so Black Cube's been around not for too long. They've been around for about 10 years, since about 2010. But they've become one of the most prominent and, to some people, sort of infamous members of this, sort of small cadre of companies, right, that do these kind of things, these private intelligence services, or what they call, because there's like a few of these, I think, that are Israeli, private Mossads. And Mossad is the Israeli version of the CIA, so like the International Intelligence Service.
So this is worldwide.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, most of their business is outside of Israel, and they have offices in Tel Aviv as well as London and Paris, and they want to open ones up all over the world, in New York, in Beijing, presumably. Yes, it's very, very. That's sort of the whole point, is that it's international. So, for example, if you're a private individual, right, who's being accused of, let's say, a financial crime involving authorities in one country and a bank headquartered in another country. There's like a particular instance I'm kind of referencing here with Black Cube, but I'm not going to get into like the specifics of it. So, but just say that's the case, right? And you are, trying to mount a defense, and you want to get information, right, that's going to help you in your defense. You call up Black Cube and you say, find me the info and, get going by whatever means necessary. Or for another example, you get wind that there's a negative story, brewing out about you out in the press, right? Because if you're like a famous person about whom negative stories might get, we don't know about this, right? Because we're just like regular people, but there's like people who have other people who tell them that other people are talking about them and are going to write bad stories in the New York Times or the Washington Post, etc.
Mysterious.
Very mysterious. So if you're one of those people, you might call Black Cube or another one of these companies. So who, though, like exactly these people are, right? These countries, these entities, these people, is a big part of the mystery, because here, and I was kind of telling you about this earlier, here's Black Cube's kind of patented line when they're asked about, anything, essentially. So, quote, "It is Black Cube's policy to never discuss its clients with any third party and to never confirm or deny any speculation made with regard to this company's work," close quote. So they're just like not going to get into it.
But, like, private lawyers and private, like, investigators are kind of the same way, right?
To some extent. And the instances in which Black Cube's involvement is public typically involves their being hired by a law firm to do work that ends up actually being used in litigation. Right, so you have to understand that there are instances in which their involvement is very public, and they want it to be public. It's part of their marketing, right? They saved this guy $100 million, right? So they can save you $100 million, so give them $1 million. You know, it's that sort of thing. But a lot of times, to my, I guess, understanding, the majority of the time, their involvement is not really publicly acknowledged, right? And for whom they work is not publicly known. It's typically very mysterious, and we'll kind of get into that with a few of my different examples here. It'll become a recurring theme, as we'll kind of see. So this is all very cryptic, right? The statement's very cryptic. The whole nature of this thing is very cryptic. Black Cube and its proponents are also, and I was telling you about this, very careful to point out that what they are doing is legal, that you know, they've consulted with the leading law firms in all of the jurisdictions in which they work, and that everything they do is very legal. It's definitely not illegal. It's all completely above board. So this is kind of their line on that. The firm says that it, quote, always operates in full compliance of the law in every jurisdiction in which it conducts its work, following legal advice from the world's leading law firms, close quote.
Legal. We are legal. I wanted you all to know that we are, in fact, doing things legally.
Have we beaten this dead horse enough? So some of the articles I read, you know, really, as we're doing here, right, overemphasize this point to the, and I think this was actually the Forbes Israel story that I was thinking of. They just kept saying it so many times to the extent that I really started to wonder just what illegal shit they're trying to cover up, right? Clearly there's something going on here where they are aware that what they're doing is at least perceived as not being above board, as potentially being illegal, and they're like really trying to make up for it. And despite their many protestations, right, Black Cube agents have been arrested in at least one instance that I heard about. So particularly, there were 2 employees who were arrested and some others who were sort of pursued, right, for crimes in Romania for allegedly harassing and committing, quote, email piracy against 3 people close to Laura Kövesi, the head of Romania's National Anti-Corruption Directorate, or DNA. So the campaign was supposedly undertaken by Black Cube to try to substantiate claims of corruption against Kövesi, although it should be pointed out that no evidence of that ever came to light, so it's not really clear, you know, whether that there was any substantiation for that whatsoever, ever. But it's also not known, as we'll see, who exactly hired them to do this, right? Some people think it was, you know, people whom Kövesi had pursued for corruption of their own that were trying to sort of get her back, right? Or, you know, whatever, could have been rivals within the government, any number of things. But there was also kind of a somewhat mysterious deal that was worked out between Black Cube and the Romanian authorities that allowed for the convicted employees to leave the country even before their already kind of light sentences were over, like within a few weeks or months. So I, and most people in America who've like heard of Black Cube, heard about them in reference to their work on the Harvey Weinstein affair. Boo, boo, hiss, hiss, hiss.
Ew.
Gross. Harvey Weinstein, not a good guy. So yes, the public revelation, of course, if you're not aware, that Harvey Weinstein, the famous movie producer, had allegedly been raping and abusing women, many women over many years, and been getting away with it, which just fucking turns my stomach. Blah. It's a whole other thing. It's the whole other cans of worms.
Very few things really make Mario angry, and it's stuff like, it's just pure
like
evil shit like that. But like, yeah.
Exactly. So, okay. This kind of gets into, I think, kind of a topic, right? Black cube, right? And we were talking about this earlier. Are they good or bad? Are they black hats or white hats, right? Are they on the side of evil or good? Black hat and white hat is sort of like a terms in sort of spying or law enforcement or hacking. Like, for example, say I'm a white hat hacker, right? So I hack into companies, but I do so in order to get these bug bounties, so-called, where I tell the company proactively what the issue is with their system, not to exploit it, right, for money or anything, but just to let them know so that they can patch it, so they don't get exploited by bad people.
Okay, so it's more of a good guy.
Right, you're like a good guy doing bad things.
Cool.
Sort of a chaotic good.
I was just about to say that.
Right, I've been playing Baldur's Gate, so I've been more familiar with all the whole alignments and everything. Nerd alert, nerd alert. So, and of course that's a big topic in and of itself, and not really anything I'm going to answer, but it's just out there. Are they kind of like, what is their true nature? They certainly see themselves as the good guys, but obviously when they're working for people like Harvey Weinstein, hard to see them as the good guys, right?
Yeah.
They're certainly not on the side of the good guys there, and in other instances too. So while many aspects of the, their involvement with the Harvey Weinstein affair were revealed by Ronan Farrow at The New Yorker, it was definitely very mysterious at the time. And it sort of, I think, exemplifies or is emblematic probably of a lot of their ways of working in the cases we don't know as much about, right? So there was a contract written up, and Black Cube's goal, written down, was to provide Weinstein with, quote, intelligence which will help the client's efforts to completely stop the publication of a new negative article in a leading New York newspaper, and obtain content from a book that was to include harmful negative information on and about the client.
Okay.
Right. So this is what they were hired to, what they were given many, many, many thousands of dollars to do, right? And this is a very, specialized thing, right? The kind of thing that you would want a private intelligence service to do, right? So part of the way that a company like Black Cube, we would execute this goal is the creation of fake companies, personas, internet identities, etc., that an agent would, represent themselves, within this, kind of fantasy world, in a sense, in order to gain contacts and information. Now, this is essentially the same thing that the CIA and the Mossad and other covert intelligence services, typically do, right? But, Black Cube is doing it for hire, for anyone who's got deep enough pockets, to pay their fees. And as you can imagine, these operations run at least into the six figures.
It seems, I forgot.
Okay.
I had a word for it, but I don't.
That's okay. So some of Black Cube undercover agents contacted women like Rose McGowan, the actress Rose McGowan, who was the one who's writing the book, right, that they were trying to get info on. And, of course, who were one of the many women who were accusing Weinstein of wrongdoing. And other Black Cube undercover agents claimed to be Weinstein accusers and contacted reporters. So they were literally working both sides.
Why?
Right? In order to try to gain information on the sources and, of course, on what the upcoming stories were about. So which again, that's their contract, right? That's what they were hired to do. So this is how they're trying to do it.
Get ahead of the game.
Yeah. One of the agents targeting Rose McGowan, who claimed to be a Diana Phillip of Rubin Capital Partners, was later identified as Stella Penn Pashanak of Black Cube. And in another Black Cube operation, she also posed as an international recruiter named Maya Lazarov for a different fake company called Kaiser and Company. So the quote-unquote Lazarov, right, actually Peshrek got an employee of a Canadian hedge fund to come to London, supposedly to recruit her. However, the whole thing seemed pretty fishy to this employee and to her company, so they actually sent employees, the employee rather, with agents from a different private investigation firm who surveilled the meeting and essentially, established that this was Black Cube, right, and not this company that they were purporting to be.
Wow.
As the New York Times put it, quote, in effect, it became a case of spy versus spy.
I was going to say, yeah.
Close quote. And yes, of course, this is what immediately conjures to mind. But it's just interesting to think about how, this isn't like, the GRU and the CIA. It's like two private intelligence. It's just weird to think about it in that context. So again, it was not exactly clear for whom Black Cube was working, and it has never become clear, even as these other things have come out about this campaign. So, clearly the anonymity of their clients is very important to Black Cube, right? They are obviously holding it very closely. And just a little side note about Stella Penn-Pashenek. We part of why we found out who she was because her photo surfaced in a Daily Mail article, and she was identified by some of the people whom she had targeted, but it also came out that she had been in a number of music videos in Israel, and that her wedding photos were published online by a bridal shop. So there were pictures of her in her real identity just out there on the public internet, and yet she's a spy, yeah.
She's not a very good spy.
No, and so, it seems, and there are other instances of this too, right? There's some bumbling. There's some Black Cube bumbling, for sure, out there that you can find evidence of. Not always, and some of the operations go perfectly smoothly, but some of these Black Cube agents are a bit of bumblers, perhaps. At times. Hey, I wouldn't be able to do it, so I'm not judging, but but they're good at keeping secrets, So one of their most secretive operations was carried out pretty recently against former members of the Obama administration, seemingly focused on those involved in the JCPOA, aka the Iran deal, which of course we've all, been hearing so much about if you're a nerd like me and you read a lot of news. But just very briefly, there was a deal worked out between 5 countries and Iran where they would give up a lot of their nuclear capacity so that it would prevent them from being able to make a nuclear bomb in any conceivable time scale, whatever that we were comfortable with. Other people didn't like that. We don't need to get into it. That's like a whole 18 other cans of worms, so like whatever. But that's kind of what that is. So it's been alleged that Black Cube was hired by aides of the Donald, President Trump.
Gross.
Right. But this is very, very disputed and not at all established. Others claim that they were Black Cube was hired by business interests. So again, we do not know who they were hired by. It's that part of it is always seemingly mysterious.
Yeah, seems like the reoccurring theme.
Exactly. Just like I said it would be. Because I wrote this, so I should know what I'm going to talk about, right? You're welcome. Others claim... I already said that. But as... I already said that too. So what we do know is... I know what I'm talking about. What we do know is that some pretty creepy interactions happened between Black Cube operatives and some of the family members of some of these former Obama officials. For example, here's a kind of a more extended quote from a Ronan Farrow article describing what happened to one spouse of a former official. Quote, in June 2017, Ann Norris, a former State Department official, received an email containing an unusual proposal. Norris is married to Ben Rhodes, a former foreign policy advisor to President Barack Obama and a prominent advocate of the Iran deal. In the email, a woman who introduced herself as Ava Novak and claimed to work for a London-based film company called Shell Productions asked Norris to consult on a movie that she described as All the President's Men meets The West Wing. It would follow the personal lives of government officials in the positions that determine war and peace during times of geopolitical crisis. Recalling the exchange, Ann Norris said that she found Ava Novak's request bizarre and that she never responded, which was a good idea. So that was the end of the quote.
Why have I heard Ava Novak? Does she get...
I don't know. It's
maybe,
just another fake persona.
Maybe I'm thinking of something else.
It's not a real. That's not.
That's yeah, obviously.
Yeah. It's the same woman actually, the Passionek woman. So, yeah, she's all over the place. So a similar thing happened to Rebecca Call, the wife of former Obama administration foreign policy advisor Colin Call. So again, there were aliases, fake LinkedIn profiles, fake websites. Just like a whole sort of facade around this, right? They're not deep. If you looked at these closely, you'd see it's just a website someone made, put some pictures up. But if you were just kind of glancing, it would seem, sort of real. And if the fake company, Rubin Capital Partners, made another appearance. So that name also keeps recurring. It seems to be a common fake company persona that Black Cube at least used to use. Of course, now it's like, well, everyone knows they're fake. So all of this was in an effort to find any possible damaging or embarrassing information about these targets or their families. It should be pointed out, none of that, no such information ever came to light. So the operation also involved targeting journalists who were believed to have been or had sources within the Obama administration. And while not everything about this, kind of shadowy operation is known, one of its targets, Ben Rose, had some thoughts. So here's his thoughts. Rhodes said that the campaign represented a troubling situation in which public servants were being targeted for their work in government. This just eviscerates any norm of how governments should operate or treat their predecessors and their families, he said. It crosses a dangerous line. Which I think is true. But, of course, that's the kind of the point of these companies, right? Is they're there to, kind of walk right up to and maybe even cross over some of those dangerous lines, in order to kind of, get this information that they're supposed to get, right? That they feel they should get. They feel they're on the right side here, right? That they're working for the good guys, even if it's clear from the outside that they're sort of not. I think just to get kind of like a more nuanced view of it, right? That's how they justify doing these things to themselves, is that it's in the service of a greater good. So if you have to like lie to somebody, well, police lie to people, you can justify it any number of ways.
For the greater good.
Right. So sometimes Black Cube is genuinely in the right, though. I mean, you read about some of these instances, and there's no, kind of question as to whether they were working for the correct side, because they expose, corruption, or they expose bribery, or, underhanded, things, or secret assets, or things like that. So it's not to say that they're always clearly black hats either,
So is there like one leader of Black Cube who like approves and disapproves who they're going to work for? Or like, why is it that they're so mixed?
I mean, we have no idea. I mean, what the actual decision making within the organization is
right.
Pretty opaque, pun intended. But I mean, we do know who their leaders are. We know that they were, founded, and I don't remember their names, but they were founded by two, ex Mossad agents, in their sort of mid-30s at the time. Their board includes, famous members, former heads of Mossad, former generals, leading members of academia. So, they certainly do have some transparency in who their leaders are, just not necessarily in terms of how they obtain clients or vet clients, other than, that they say they vet them very well. But, we don't have a lot of transparency necessarily in that respect. So, yeah, this kind of gets into the fact that there's the sales pitch, right, that Black Cube gives, and then there's, like, the reality of what happens, and the mystery is in the differential, right, or in the lack thereof within both of those, because obviously the pitch is not telling us everything, and we just really don't know everything about what is actually going on. So it's kind of leaves a lot to be mysterious. Okay, so here's another little quote from a Quartz article about this whole idea of their sales pitch. Quote, the document makes vague references to services, including identifying your opponent's vulnerabilities, interests, priorities, and strategy, and having a proactive approach, including several unique methods, especially in the social engineering field. One subhead, ominously titled Identifying Misconduct and Developing Leverage, discusses finding evidence of criminality and using it to maximum effect through courts or authorities.
Legal.
All completely legal. So, yes, we're left with a fair amount of mystery, some of it a bit more philosophical, right? This whole, are they good or bad question. Some of it more practical, especially, for whom has Black Cube worked? What are their exact, methods, sources, etc.? As with any intelligence service, whether it private or public, secrecy and mystery are kind of the point, right? They're not here to tell us everything that they're doing. But, we can certainly look for more mystery and probably more scandal and controversy from Black Cube in the future. So, definitely a name to keep track of.
I bet there's a lot of dirt to dig up.
Right.
Within that company.
Investigate the investigators, man.
It's kind of creepy.
It is. The whole thing is a little bit creepy, especially when they're like emailing your wife pretending that they want to give money to her charity, but instead they're just like trying to find out shit about your life. Like, yeah, that's pretty crazy. So my sources, and I've got quite a few, were Efrat Peretz and Hadass Magan, or Magan at Globes, which is an Israeli business publication. Wikipedia, of course, the Black Cube and Mossad pages. Shuki Sadeh at Haaretz, AFP at the Times of Israel, Yuval Hirschhorn at Forbes Israel, YNetNews.com, Simon Bowes at The Guardian, Ronan Farrow, of course, at The New Yorker, Jim Rutenberg, Matthew Goldstein, and William Rauschbaum at The New York Times, Richard Engel from MSNBC, DJ Pangburn at Fast Company, and Max de Haldevang at Quartz.
Wow.
That's my sources.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
Oh my god.
Wow.
It's so crazy.
Wow.
It's like nuts.
Wow.
Oh my god.
Wow.
Okay, now you go.
It's my turn?
It's your turn.
All right.
It's your time to shine, Chloe.
All right, everybody. I have a ghost story.
Ooh.
And Mario,
Yes.
I know you don't
What?
believe in the paranormal and the supernatural, but I think
I'm
you need
open
to
mind.
open. Okay, all right, all right.
I have an open mind.
Yes.
Skepticism means you always have an open mind. Keep that in mind.
Really? I never thought.
That,
I never thought
the
of skepticism like that at all.
The strict no, because people conflate erroneously skepticism with cynicism, or things of that nature. It's not. Skepticism is taking all evidence as it comes on its own terms.
Okay, so
and that's my soapbox.
This is more of a legend,
Cool.
and it's nuts. It's really crazy.
Okay.
We've got magic and murder and betrayal and all kinds of stuff. So
Lots of crazy stuff.
our story begins in Jamaica in 1746 with the Rose Hall mansion. So it was built off the coast of Montego Bay. It's a 290-acre plot of land bought by an Englishman named Henry Fanning. So he bought it for him and his future wife, Rosa Kelly, to live on. So he's like, all right, I'm going to buy this land. So they married a year later in 1747, but Henry died a few months after the wedding before he even got to build and like use the land. So Rosa, now a widow, she moves on and marries a wealthy landowner named George Ashe. So George is the one that goes on and he builds the mansion. And some believe it was named after Rosa, like Rose Hall. But I think one of my sources said he was like close to the Rose family, which is some kind of wealthy family during the time. So he might have named it after them. We don't really know. But he also dies a few years later, in 1752, after the construction was completed. So, the Rose Mansion operates as an enormous sugar plantation. It supposedly has over 2,000 slaves working its fields at one point in history. It's one of the largest in Jamaica, and it's one of the most famous at the time. The mansion is gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's Georgian style, so it's symmetrical, it's simplistic. So it's also based on the architecture in ancient Greece and Rome. It's gorgeous. So Rosa moves on again after George dies, and a year later she marries a man named Norwood Witter. So by all reports, this is a very unhappy marriage. Okay, so Norwood, he spends all of Rosa's money, he leaves her with debt, and then he dies in 1767. Finally in 1768 she marries John Palmer. This is her fourth husband now. So John Palmer, super rich, he's a landowner, and he owns the neighboring Palmyra estate. And he's a widower, and he has 2 sons living in England. So Rosa and John have pretty happy marriage until Rosa's death in 1790. And then John dies 7 years later in 1797. So John leaves the Rose Hall mansion to his sons in England, but they never came to Jamaica to officially claim it. Instead, the ownership passes on to his grandnephew by the same name, John Rose Palmer, who moves from England to Jamaica, and he takes charge in 1818. So John marries a woman named Annie Patterson, making her Annie Palmer, and it's her who becomes the White Witch of Rose Hall. And here's her story. So, the legend. And obviously, like most legends, there's lots of variations to the story, and as time goes on it changes and morphs into something new. So Annie had an English mother and Irish father, and she grew up in Haiti with her parents being immigrants, or they moved to Haiti when she was young. There's little confusion there. Anyway, she learned voodoo from her nanny, who mostly raised her. So she had a natural talent for voodoo. And so let's go over voodoo a little bit. So voodoo's a common religion in Haiti. It merges both Catholic and African beliefs. So like this is kind of a common thing when you look into depth about the slave trade and the lives of Africans and the whole journey between the 18th and 19th centuries and stuff like that. Africans in the slave trade who were brought over to the New World were forbidden to practice their native religions, totally cut off. So to get around this, they equated their gods with Catholic saints. So they changed names, but their origins were still the same. And they performed their rituals with imagery that aligned with the Catholic Church. So it was kind of masking their real religion with Catholicism. I'd like to note that there are lots of misconceptions about voodoo, and that it's wrongly associated with like devil worship and violence and dark magic. And no, that's not true. It's not really a thing. And most of that idea comes from the very dangerous and violent slave uprisings that took place in the late 18th century. And because voodoo was something that they practiced, people just kind of put two and two together, wrongly. And associated those kinds of things with the religion. Voodoo does include animal sacrifices and voodoo dolls, but it's not the kind you model after someone and stick with a pin. It's not really a thing. But the dolls do symbolize a specific god, and it attracts their power and their influence, and it's used in rituals and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this whole, having multiple gods, having symbols for the gods, figurines, it's very, very common. I mean, there's versions of this from, the Eastern animistic religions to ancient Rome to, whatever you want to look at. So it's just interesting. I'm very interested in religion.
For sure.
That it's pretty universal, and again, not at all these misconceptions, that people have. It's actually, it's just very normal. Like, voodoo is just a very sort of normal when you look into it, there's nothing very remarkable about it.
It has a lot of Catholic beliefs, yeah. So the idea that Annie Palmer practiced voodoo is pretty important to the legend and the components. It's a important component to the overall story, probably an origin for the darkness and mystery that surrounds Rose Hall even to this day and why it's so popular. So Annie, she meets John Palmer. So Annie Patterson becomes Annie Palmer. They get married. She moves off to Jamaica with him, and they did not have a happy marriage. So their honeymoon didn't last very long. John was very abusive to her. He neglected her. And as a result, Annie took on many lovers. She was very promiscuous. Some of them were even the slaves from their own plantation. And, they grow apart. Their marriage gets worse, and it all escalates one day when John walks in on Annie during one of these extramarital affairs, and he beats her within an inch of her life, reportedly with a riding crop. So absolutely brutal. Annie's like, fuck you. I mean, she didn't say it, but she retaliates. She poisons John, and he ends up dead within the next few days. But some say that Annie put a spell on him and cursed him, and that's how he died. But a lot of sources say poison, and Annie was never convicted, even though this was kind of suspicious. But she went on to inherit the estate, and inherit the whole thing, the estate and the plantation, the land. So at that point, she's one of the richest and most influential women in Jamaica, now that she owns the biggest plantation in the entire country. So this is when her, quote, reign of terror begins, right? So she marries again. So she actually after John Palmer dies, she marries 2 more times, actually. But both husbands died in mysterious ways. So it's said that she killed her second husband by stabbing him in the chest while he was sleeping. And one of those sources said that she poured acid in his ear to make sure that he was dead, but that sounded really dumb. The third husband, she strangled to death, supposedly, with the help of her slave lover named Taku, which we'll talk about. He comes back later. So, despite her, she has all these subsequent marriages, Annie continues her promiscuous ways, taking slaves as lovers, even when she is married. She mostly gets married to quell the rumors that she's being promiscuous, so that was really the main reason. So, this is where the legend gets kind of crazy. So, legend has it that she has all these slaves as lovers, and she is incredibly cruel. She has this crazy power trip, right? So when she was tired of them, she got rid of them. She killed them, or she cursed them with black magic or something. She set traps around the property so they could never escape. The slaves that worked in the house, she set up this rule where they had to whistle whenever they were around food, making sure that they weren't taking any for themselves, because like the logic there, I guess, was that because you can't whistle if your mouth is full, right? I guess, or something. And so she had very cruel punishments for very little things. She would decapitate them if they were caught stealing food or like not whistling, crazy shit like that. And because of this cruelty and her regular practice of voodoo, the slaves nicknamed her the White Witch of Rose Hall. So that's where all of that started. So let's go back to Annie's slave lover, Taku, who was also well versed in voodoo and magic. He also practice these types of things. So there are a few, like I said, it's a legend, so there's very few versions of the story. And one is that Taku caught wind that Annie was getting tired of him and that she was planning to kill him. So Taku acted first by placing a spell on her that weakened her so he could strangle her to death. Another version is that Annie fell in love with someone else, but that man that she fell in love with wasn't into her, but he was into Taku's granddaughter, and Annie was like, I need to get her out of the way. So she kills the granddaughter, and Taku is so distraught, so angry, that he then retaliates and strangles Annie to death. And some stories say that Annie put a spell on Taku's granddaughter, and it summoned a ghost that would cause the person whom it visited to die a slow, painful death. So Taku and the rest of the slaves, so Annie was definitely killed. And the rest of the slaves, they bury her, but they take precautions. Like, they burn all of her possessions, so her spirit...
salt and burn the body.
Classic supernatural shit. Her spirit can't come back. They placed her in this, like, concrete coffin enchanted with all these spells, and they did some kind of, like, binding ritual or something. It didn't really work, though, because Annie's spirit was continued to be spotted all the time. Her murder also coincided with the slave uprisings that erupted all over Jamaica in the 19th century. But despite this, lots of fighting, lots of violence, Rose Hall continued to stand. Some say it's because, like, there's magic surrounding it and that Annie isn't really gone and her spirit's, like, protecting the place, or that it wasn't destroyed because, like, people purposely didn't destroy it because there's, like, an evil spirit in there, and if you destroy it, she'll be released. And then she'll be able to roam wherever she pleases or something. So the estate was eventually abandoned. It fell into disrepair until 1960, when the property was purchased by former Miss USA, Michelle Rollins, and her husband, and they refurbished the plantation. They bought it, they redid it. So they added floors made of mahogany. There were added interior windows and doorways. There were wood ceilings and panelings. They decorated with silk wallpaper and beautiful paintings and chandeliers. And they turned it into a tourist attraction and a museum. And there's even like a bar and a restaurant there. So we have this great story, this great legend. But let's talk about the real story, all right? Let's get real here. So the legend is really just a legend. So the real Annie Palmer was born Annie Mary Patterson, and she was a Jamaican of Scots descent. So she didn't grow up in Haiti. She didn't have a Haitian nanny. She wasn't trained in voodoo at all. She did marry John Rose Palmer in 1820, but he was her first and only husband, and they had, seemingly normal life. And Annie never killed her husband. She never killed anybody. And John died of natural causes in 1827. And they didn't keep slaves at all. The estate was only cared for by slaves for a few years at most. Annie died in 1846 and she didn't have a lot left, but she left what she had to her goddaughter named Julia Mary Spence. So because there were these, like, huge amounts of debt attached to both Rose Hall and John Palmer's other estate, Palmyra. They were passed into the hands of the receivers, and at that point they stood empty and abandoned until 1960 when Michelle Rollins bought it and all that good stuff. Right. That actually happened. So you're kind of wondering, like, how did all of this legend even happen? Like, where does this even come from? So some of the like husbands and like promiscuity maybe stems from Rosa Palmer, and how she had 4 husbands before she married the elder John Palmer.
Right. The fact that they were both named John Palmer doesn't help.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
For sure. And the legend definitely, like, her fate was definitely sealed when there was a book written in 1929 by a man named Herbert de Lisser titled The White Witch of Rose Hall. And it was a fictional book. It was totally made up. People were like, oh, Rose Hall, that's a real place. Maybe this story is real. And the rest is history, you know.
Nobody can write it in a book if it ain't real.
It's like saying everything on the internet is true.
Exactly.
Because it is. Okay. So, the question here is Rose Hall really haunted? Yes. Yes, it is.
Answer to question.
Everything's haunted. The whole... If people say it's haunted, it's haunted. That's it, period. But Rose Hall is notorious for being haunted, and it's still like a huge tourist attraction. It's been visited by like ghost hunters and like those TV shows and all that good stuff. Just people looking for a little excitement. I personally would love to get hammered in that bar and like go ghost hunting and shit. Like, take me on a tour. There are claims of like a shadowy figure wearing green velvet riding clothes, riding a black horse across the estate. And others say they see a woman dressed in white hovering around the stairs. And I'll like post pictures of the mansion because it's beautiful. There's this beautiful, like, it's on like a hill, huge staircase that like leads up to this gorgeous mansion. So they say that she's hovers around those stairs, and she sometimes is moving around the building as well. Mm-hmm. The cellar area, which actually is now a gift shop, has reports of like mysterious screams being heard or like footsteps running across the ceiling, like creepy ghosty shit like that. And I mean, yeah, so overall there's like a lot of mystery surrounding the place. Mm-hmm. And it is a really gorgeous place with lots of history and lots of weird things attributed to it. There is like a huge like white coffin that's there, but they don't know if it's Annie's or not. I don't think she even died on the property. I think they like gave away the property before she died or something like that. And like the timeline for all of this is really weird because they talked about how like she died around the time of the slave uprisings, which was like in the 1830s, but then she like divorced her like last husband in like the 1750s or something. Like it was like a weird timeline, and I tried my best, but yeah, it's wild.
It's pretty crazy.
Wild.
Crazy.
I mean, yeah, that's it. That's my story. I got it, man.
Good job.
It wasn't that long, but it's there.
You did it.
But I was like, I want to do something ghosty, and you're like, okay, you should do something from like a different country. And I was like, oh, exactly. For sure.
Because we're always all about doing, you know, every single possible place and country we can do.
I'm a slut for Jamaica.
Yeah, you do love Jamaica, so I'm kind of surprised we hadn't done something from there before, actually.
I think I'm going to do some more. We'll see.
Good.
But I do have weird shit in the news. Because I really want to talk about it. Weird shit in the news.
Thank you for listening.
Weird
guys.
shit. So,
weird shit in the news.
This is from CNN article. It says, quote, Hawaii hiker says she followed a voice down an unfamiliar trail, then she got lost for 7 days. 17 days. So, it's a crazy story. So, this is an article by Steve Almacy. So, it happened about 3 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. Her name is Amanda Eller, and she went to the Makawao Forest Reserve on the Hawaiian island of Maui. So she wanted to like connect with nature and like get grounded. And I get So she's a physical therapist. She had the whole day herself. So she was like, okay, I'm going to go for a 3-mile walk, being there for a couple hours. So, quote, I don't really know what happened. All I can say is that I have strong sense of internal guidance, whatever you want to call that, a voice, spirit. Everybody has a different name for it. My heart was telling me to walk down this path, go left, great, go right. It was so strong. So I guess it turned out it wasn't strong. She like meditated on a log or something, and then she wanted to go back to her car, but she tried one path, didn't work, tried another path, didn't work. She was lost. So, I guess she turned up on a boar path. And eventually she's there for 17. She ended up spending 17 days in the wood just trying to get back to her car, trying to stay alive and catch the attention of searchers in helicopters. And then when she was found, she spent 2 days in the Maui hospital being treated for severe sunburn, twisted knee, and ankle problems. And then she went home. And she wants to be back to work in 2 weeks. So she talks about how this is her destiny. It's not a punishment, and kind of freaked her out. But in hindsight, even though she hates cell phones, she would have taken hers with her into the forest. Also, next time she'll take a water bottle.
Good. Glad she learned her lesson.
Scary, though.
I learned that lesson a long time ago. Nature is scary, and don't go into it. I like air conditioning. So.
And I enjoy the air conditioning.
Thanks for listening, you guys.
Guys, thank you so much for
75
listening.
weeks.
If you are here on episode 75 and you listen to all of our episodes, you are a real OG. And
Right.
you should consider donating to Patreon. $1 a month.
That's all it takes.
All it takes, baby. Tell your friends. Follow us on all the social medias.
Insta, Mario Text 30, my Twitter.
Tweeter. LOL.
All the stuff.